One of the last explorers during the Age of Exploration disappeared in the Brazilian rainforest under the guidance of Manuscript 512. This 10-page manuscript is about an unknown Portuguese official and its fascinating accounts of a European-like city in the heart of the Amazon. This tattered and worn document from 1753 was either dismissed or obsessed over. With hindsight, a European empire in the Amazon in 1753 doesn't sound right, but this document is actually based in reality. More on that later in the video. In 1839, a naturalist found this document one day at the Rio de Janeiro Library and submitted the manuscript to the Brazilian Historic and Geographic Institute. The true title translated from Portuguese to English as A Historical Relation of an Occult, Large and Very Old Settlement with No Inhabitants that was found in the year 1753. A mouthful indeed. So that's why we call it Manuscript 512. I think Brazil's recent independence in the 1800s and their yearning for national identity is why, in 1839, the manuscript was prominent. The Inga stone had recently been discovered in Brazil as well. This is a rock that has a lot of ancient art and hieroglyphs on it. Some of these hieroglyphs look like Greek or Roman or even Phoenician letters. Due to the supremacist lens that unfortunately had the 19th century in a chokehold, this stone was not looked at as a piece in its own right. With all that considered, this will explain why the manuscript heavily biased towards the European comparison, instead of observing the site in its own right. I'll link a copy of the document in the description if you'd like to check it out for yourself. Just know that the document wasn't found in good condition, so there are some missing texts due to rot. The text refers to a colonel whose name has been lost that took a party of soldiers into the Amazon for their lost exploration reasons and came across a glistening mountain that really stood out to them. So the Portuguese colonel took a few native slaves and the party marched up into the mountain and came across a large road that serendipitously took them to the summit of that mountain. There they found a dilapidated civilization, a triple archway greeting them with symbols that neither slave nor Portuguese recognized. However, they did resemble Greco-Roman letters. They entered the Roman arch-styled entry, then they were greeted by an open courtyard bordered with small huts, a black platform supporting a statue pointing north, Roman-style pillars, and a gold coin that had a boy kneeling with a bow and arrow on one side and a crown on the other. The party found the soil to have gold fragments and many silver-infused rocks. The colonel wanted to keep the location secret for greed reasons, but we know it's in the northern coastal part of Brazil. The colonel was writing to a prominent figure back in Portugal. I'm not sure if he only brought a few party members up there or if he bribed everyone's silence, but it was important that no one knew about the location, because Portugal wanted to claim the riches and more particularly the colonel. No one knows if he was able to be funded back or if anyone was able to reap the benefits of the precious ores and metals. Albeit rotten and worm-eaten, this manuscript was enough to change the way Brazil was seen. Portugal now had even more of a reason to hold Brazil and exploit them. Yet Brazil gained its independence in 1822. The manuscript resurfaced a while later, and Brazil was now a free agent to work with. Many came for the gold, the culture, the beautiful beaches, but some came for exploration. Brazil did launch an expedition in the 1840s, but it came up short. The manuscript made many skeptics, and the idea of a lost city grew cold. In the 20th century, another colonel, Percy Fawcett, wanted to revive the idea. Honestly, the man was beyond thrilled and way too serious about his expeditions. He thought the archway was a portal to another dimension and on one of his expeditions, a party member collapsed due to fatigue. Dehydrated, bugs nesting, and feeding on his rotten wounds, this man told Fawcett to leave him behind. Fawcett pulled the man up, stabbed him in the stomach, and told him, "If you're going to die, you'll do it on your feet." The man surprisingly made it out alive. Fawcett became obsessed with the lost city and what he called Z. His wife and son idolized him and followed and believed everything he said. Fawcett had many accomplishments, served in World War I, expert survivalist, and had the respect of the British National Geographical Society, as well as the greater public. Of course, he didn't tell people his belief was fueled by psychics and spirituality. His main basis, though, was Manuscript 512. Yet he went into the jungle multiple times to search for the city. The Amazon is no joke. We still to this day don't know what all is in there. Deadly, venomous, and poisonous animals, as well as vegetation, weather elements, disease. Such a dangerous place to be. And how could I forget the varying uncontacted indigenous peoples? Most began as a kind of curious people, but after centuries of enslavement, brutal mass murders, and destruction of their lands, many grew to hate white people. Even the gentrified Brazilians weren't safe because they were even attacking or pillaging them as well. From the well-known indigenous tribes, most all have stopped cannibalism today, but back then more than now did still cannibalize, killed or less likely eaten. Also, disease could have been passed to the indigenous people. It's just best to fully avoid native people while there. To this day, we can't fully discredit the manuscript. It's obviously not completely real, but I think it's just too biased. It heavily leans on the Greco-Roman style as a comparison, heavily implied there were European ancestors living in the area as indigenous peoples, and that the native Amazonians had nothing to do with the city. Sounds not based in reality with hindsight. Fawcett, impressed by the discovery of Machu Picchu, was absolutely convinced that this lost city was there, albeit covered in vegetation, most likely. Maybe in another video, I'll go more into detail about Fawcett's expeditions. It's not every day you hear about a real-life explorer in the Amazon like Indiana Jones. The man was the definition of a tyrannical king when he was in the Amazon. His final expedition was one that was very publicized. The members were Fawcett, his 18-year-old son, and his 18-year-old son's friend. The mission was quite promising, but ended in great tragedy when the three men never came home. They were never found, and it's assumed they never found the city. I feel for Fawcett's wife, losing her husband and her eldest son. Fawcett's wife was honestly just as thrilled as he was, but had enough sense to avoid the jungle. When I first read the story, I was almost certain that Mrs. Fawcett was going to pack her sack and go find her man in that jungle. There have been over 10 expeditions led into the western part of the Amazon, in the name of finding Fawcett and the lost city of Z. Each expedition has been a failure, and most vanished in the Mato Grosso region just as Fawcett did. Over 100 lives lost to date, and none had any success further than Fawcett. However, we are discovering that there are indeed traces of huge civilizations in the Amazon alone. Around the 15 to 1600s on the Amazon River's side banks, there were indeed large pyramids and causeways and even man-made fertile soil. Percy Fawcett was right for all of the wrong reasons. It wasn't European ancestors or aliens that made these cities that rivaled major European cities like London or Venice in population. My generation will be the ones to unearth these august works of man. Who knows? I mean, this could obtain the eighth wonder of the world. There is something mysterious and poetic about the Amazon. I can imagine it feels like trekking through the dark and not knowing what's 10 feet in front of you. Just feeling around for some kind of familiarity. The Amazon really is one of the last ecosystems on land to be observed in a familiar capacity. Although this place is inspirational, it needs protection. It's frowned upon for regular people to come and do their own exploring. It's so dangerous the Brazilian government doesn't want to be responsible for constant rescues. The uncontacted people of the jungle are immune deficient, so they are legally protected and cannot be contacted. Brazil is a sovereign nation that doesn't need a bunch of Westerners coming to their land and causing chaos in their nation. Manuscript 512 was about a Portuguese finding El Dorado. To put it simply, Fawcett drank the red Kool-Aid and paid for it. The Amazonians of past centuries indeed rivaled Europe in civility. We should never underestimate the human experience. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to hear more in detail about Percy Fawcett and his prison jungle shanking ways, please let me know in the comments. Thank you, and take care.